So, pumpkins, witches, Batman, Wonder Woman. It's that time of the year again in the United States. Of course, I'm talking about Halloween, right? But believe it or not, that means it's also that time of year for some communities in Jamaica. Pharmacy is full of Halloween costume, even some communities that do trick or treat. So, what do you think? Should Jamaicans be celebrating Halloween? And while we're talking about Halloween, I want to talk to you about the Obeah Act, all right? Want your thoughts on that, want you to listen to what I have to say, and then, of course, tell me what you think as well. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dion Jackson Miller. Stay tuned. Let me say this first of all. You know this thing people do on social media where if you give an opinion on something, they go back and they look for some opinion you gave on the same issue years ago that's at odds with what you're saying now, and they like to screenshot it with this you. Well, let me tell you from now that many of my opinions have changed over the years. As I become more exposed to different types of knowledge from different areas, I'm fortunate in that I get to interview a lot of very, very knowledgeable people in all kinds of different areas. And yeah, different perspectives. And yes, so sometimes my opinion does change. Absolutely not apologizing for that. So my opinion on Halloween in Jamaica has changed, all right? I used to get really bringle and say, why is this happening? Why are people celebrating Halloween? You know, foolishness, that, and get myself worked up about it, and that is what has changed. I'm still not into it, you know. I wouldn't be celebrating it. If I had small children now, them not doing no trick or treat. They wouldn't be doing any trick or treat, I can tell you that. And I still do think that we're far too ready, I think, to adopt things from other people's culture, and that we're too willing to say things that other people do as being better than things that we do, especially if it's from the United States. But I'm way more chill now. So, you know, if that you want to do, it's not hurting me, it's not hurting anybody else. I know a lot of people just find it something fun to do, whether with their children or not. People like playing dress up, you know. So, you know, you do your thing. That's not something I'm going to get upset about. It has, though, raised for me a couple of things to think about. How are we preserving our own culture and our own folklore? You know, the culture of the United States is really strong, you know, and they export it to people like us through their popular culture. Meaning we watch their movies, we listen to their music, we watch their TV shows. So that's how we know about Halloween. And of course, we have people living in that country as well. So how, though, are we preserving our own folk culture? So if you stop a lot of Jamaican children and you ask them, what is Halloween? They can't tell you. Suppose you ask them what is rolling calf. You think they can tell you? Or if you ask them about Duppy story, or when last them tell Duppy story when light go away, you know, can they talk about those things? And this doesn't have anything to do, let me hasten to say, with whether you support their cult or not. I'm talking about preservation of our folklore or folk forms, which is something that every culture does. How well are we doing it? That's a little bit of a concern for me. Then now I want to talk to you about the Obeah Act. In 2019, Justice Minister Delroy Chuck had said the Obeah Act was going to be repealed. And I remember I had interviewed at the time the current president of the Senate, Tom Tavares Finson, and Senator Tavares Finson was very strong that this needed to happen. You know, he was like, why is this something that is on the books as a criminal offense? But the church them rail up and other people rail up, so the government backed off with that. But I do think the Obeah Act is something that should be repealed. And let me tell you why. Look, this is a law coming from 1898. We have to be really cautious around laws coming from that kind of era, because we know that the criminal law has been used as a tool to oppress our people. We know that. That's a historical fact. So look at what the law itself says. It says Obeah shall be deemed to be the same as Mayalism. Now, Mayalism has been described, among other things, as an Afro-Jamaican folk religion. A person practicing Obeah under the Act is said to be any person who, to effect any fraudulent or unlawful purpose or for gain or to frighten people, uses or pretends to use any occult means or pretends to possess any supernatural power or knowledge. And an instrument of Obeah means anything used or intended to be used by a person and pretended by such person to be possessed of any occult or supernatural powers. And the penalty, if you're convicted of Obeah, is a prison term of up to 12 months. Now, in a really interesting article, which I'll link below, Diana Payton, I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, she writes that Obeah was initially criminalized to protect slavery against uprisings. She says the current law was made to symbolize Jamaica's hostility to African connections and to suppress poor people's religion. And she writes that Obeah was first made illegal in 1760 as part of a sweepingly repressive act passed in the aftermath of Tacky's Rebellion, the largest uprising of enslaved people in the 18th century British colonized Caribbean. I'm going to stop for a moment to say there have been many calls over the years, by the way, for Tacky to be made a national hero. We haven't heard anything about that. We don't seem to have got anywhere with that, just as an aside. Now, the law, she says, meaning the Obeah Act, was a direct response to the fact that the rebellion's leaders were advised by Obeah men who attempted to give them courage, solidarity, and spiritual courage. So, I mean, she's one writer, clearly very knowledgeable on the issue, and there are others, and they all point to the same concerns. The fact that Obeah is rooted in African religious retentions, the fact that the laws against Obeah were an attempt to suppress cultural identity and religious identity of the enslaved peoples, and as well to try to do away with, to strike at the heart of anything that the slaves would pull on to strengthen themselves, especially as they were trying to rise up against slavery and the evils of slavery. So that's one thing. And that's why I said when you see anything coming from that kind of era, you need to look into it. You need to look behind it. You need to look at what knowledgeable people who have researched that era have said about those kinds of laws. Let me bring you forward now into the current day, because I think if the Obeah Act is challenged in court, I think it's highly likely it would be found to be unconstitutional. I think it breaches the right to freedom of religion. I think it breaches the right to freedom of expression. I think it breaches the right probably to freedom of association. I think it could be said to breach the right to freedom from discrimination on the grounds of religion. So that's another thing to take into account. So celebrate Halloween, don't celebrate Halloween. Look, that's up to you. As I said, it wouldn't be my choice, but I think that is a matter of individual choice. But I do think we should repeal the Obeah Act, not because we're going around locking up Obeah men or Obeah women. We're not doing that. Diana Payton says the last arrest she found recorded for Obeah was in 1977 and the last conviction was in 1964. This has nothing to do with whether you or I believe in Obeah or practice Obeah. I'm simply saying that the criminal law is not for everything. Not everything you disapprove of should be criminalized. Just because something doesn't align with your values or your belief system, even your religious beliefs, that doesn't mean it should be criminalized. Especially as we talk about becoming a republic, removing the King of England as our head of state, who is also the King of Jamaica. I think we need to make certain symbolic moves that go along with that. And one of those is removing antiquated laws that were used to oppress our people. I think the Obeah Act is one of those. It was rooted in racism and in the attempt to oppress enslaved peoples and to hold on to the institution of slavery. So yeah, I think it needs to be repealed. Want to know, as always, what you think? So drop your comments below. You know, I love the comment section. I try to reply to some, but there's a whole heap of comments. You know, we have very, very good engagement going on, so I can't reply to everybody, but I do try to read a lot of them. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Dion. I'll see you next time.